So on this episode of What's Mine Is Yours, our guest is Tim James, and he is really funny. I think you guys will enjoy listening to him. His backstory is quite interesting. He comes from Murfreesboro, Tennessee, so not far from here, and he moved to LA, sold cough syrup, had a full career of something else. It sounds like maybe his parents were really kind of were encouraging him to have, a regular job like a lot of parents do. And he just thought this wasn't for me. He moves back to Tennessee and, works really hard at being a songwriter, which I will say the common thread with him and what he even says at one point in this interview is perseverance, just working really hard and not giving up. I will say there is something interesting that he says, though, that he was kind of later in the game of getting into this. He was 37 years old. And for a lot of people, that's very daunting to think about, like just getting started with your career at 37 years old. I think that's, we don't like to think about that. But he does say at one point that if it were today's music industry, he wouldn't have made the same choices because of the new challenges and hurdles you have to overcome in this industry versus, 20, 30 years ago. So that is interesting. However, I don't want that to be a deterring thing if you're somebody who's watching this and you want to be in this business. I just think there's, again, a new way to look at things and there's new tools to use and to take advantage of. I found it, interesting that he's still writing, it sounds like, all the time. And he's even still interested on how you get that single. How do you, get in with the right crew these days? And in his eyes, even though his music might not fit with, more of your current people today, he's very much like, hey, listen, if they called me and they wanted to put it on a record, I would absolutely say, heck yeah, change a word, do whatever you want. I need a single, because that's unfortunately how this business is turning into. It's not about an album cut anymore. It's not what you have on the album. It's am I the single? And for him, he's still fighting for that. I mean, I mentioned to him that he has, music being released by Kenny Chesney, George Strait, and Chris Stapleton today, right now. But the hard truth of it is that artists like Kenny Chesney and George Strait, maybe not as much Chris Stapleton, they're not really played on the radio as much anymore. They're not on your top Spotify playlists. So having that cut from even artists like that's the scary part, is that shelf life to some degree is turning more into a legacy of a career versus a current career. So having music on with them is, wow, what an accomplishment. It's just unfortunately not the same thing as it once was, maybe, again, 15, 20 years ago. So figuring out where Tim is going to go next and artists that he's going to aim to write for, because that is the world we're living in, is going to be interesting to see. And I look forward to seeing if Tim, has any more cuts that I know he definitely wants songs that are still on the radio and still things that are doing well. So I guess we will see. He mentioned artists like Luke Combs, and I think that's an incredible artist that is very current today, that does a very good job at still bringing nostalgia to a modern day. And I think that would be a great artist for him to hopefully one day have a cut on. I think it's really interesting what he says in this interview. He says, you're only as good as your last song. And that's kind of what you're known for, right? So if you're in town and you're saying like, oh, I haven't had someone record a song of mine in 20 years, it's just like people kind of look over you. And so it's the cold hard truth. And he sits here and he goes, you really are only as good as the last thing you're doing. And I push back on him and I definitely say like, well, what about your legacy, And I think there is something to be said there, but at the same time, he's right. If people aren't recording your music, at what point is it becoming something of the past? And unfortunately, if you're not making money doing something, then is it your job or is it just a hobby? We talk about that a lot, but I think Tim still has a future here in this town, and he has one heck of a legacy and has already accomplished so much. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, because I sure enjoyed sitting down with Tim. Tim James, thank you so much for being on What's Mine Is Yours.
I appreciate you having me.
We are wrapping up season 2 right now, and you're one of our last guests, so I'm really glad that you're kind of helping tie a bow on the end of season 2.
Well, that's a sweet way of putting it, but we'll see about that.
So I have obviously looked into each of my guests extensively, and with you, I try to avoid like the typical talk of, how'd you get here? But at the same time, your backstory is really, really interesting. I mean, you go from living, you're born and raised in Murfreesboro. You leave to LA, you're selling cough syrup, and then you move back because you want to pursue this at 37?
Close, yeah.
Wow. Okay, because that's interesting. Can you give a few details onto what made you do that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be 102 Monday, so it's been a long road. No, the way I like to edit that story is, I grew up in Murfreesboro. I went to junior college and got kicked out of junior college. And then I flunked out of MTSU. MTSU is not the Harvard of the South, trust me, but me and school just were not friends. So I ran into a guy that is from Murfreesboro, and I saw him at home after I'd flunked out of college. And I just was kind of spinning my wheels, like, what am I going to do with my life? And I think if you grow up in a blue-collar family, my parents were like, man, that's great, you like music, but you got to get a job. You got to work. And so that kind of stayed with me. I didn't even know, Stapleton had said to me one time, I didn't even know that you could write songs for a living. I didn't know that was a job. Yeah. And even though I grew up right down the road, I knew it was a job, but my parents were more of the mindset that, it's just drunks and guys, it kind of is. But no.
I was like, what is
right?
it?
You know what I mean? It's just like those guys, all they do is sit around, smoke cigarettes, and drink whiskey all day, when in actuality, you go into an office and you try to write a song, which I did forever. But nonetheless, I having never been on a plane at 23, got on a plane and went to L.A.
That was your first time going on a plane?
Yeah. Got on a plane and went, man, this is cool. And about, Grand Canyon, I was like, wow, this vodka is super strong at 36,000 feet. And it was great. I got to L.A. Excuse me. I was going to stay 6 months. And I stayed 12 years. I played super small college sports. So my buddy always says, you played, but they never even washed your jersey. And I'm like, that's nice. I appreciate you pointing that out. But I played basketball, and most of the people I met that are in the entertainment business, I mean, guys that went on to be, quite honestly, some of them are superstars. Mm-hmm. They were struggling actors or musicians. I just talked to one of my buddies yesterday. Is the drummer in that band Tool. I don't know if you know who Tool is.
Yeah.
And when I knew him, he was delivering cassettes, and now he's one of the top 10 drummers in the world. Clooney is an old friend of mine. Same, I was with Clooney.
You're friends with Clooney?
Mm-hmm. I haven't seen him I think we went to his house. I know all the girls are like, can you call him? Hang on, where's my phone? Call George.
You have his phone number? No. Oh. We can do that right here.
I think I did.
Okay.
But so he and all these other guys, my friends that are comedians and actors, we were all members of the Hollywood YMCA.
Okay.
And we all played basketball together. Danny Carey, the drummer in Tool, Clooney, a bunch of other guys, John Campanera. And I was actually showed up one night to play, and I called him, nobody called him Clooney in those days, but George came in and he said, man, I've got a TV show I think's finally going to take off. He was in Facts of Life or that kind of stuff.
Is this ER?
Yeah.
Okay.
So he's, puts his foot on the wall next to me and says, I got a show I think's going to make it. And I was like, oh, cool, dude. What is it? And he goes, ER. And I was like, I never saw him again.
I never saw him.
And that's not entirely true. About 10 years ago we're the same age, so it was a little longer, but roughly 10 years ago, I went out there because one of my other buddies called and said George was his best man. So he was like, hey man, it's my birthday. We're going to have this huge party at Club Lingerie in Hollywood. And I was like, living in Murfreesboro. And I was like, why not? Go back to the old stomping grounds. So went back and we ended up the next day. We went to George's house, which was funny, because now it's like he had gone from...
It's a lot different than the YMCA basketball league.
Crazy different. I was like, can I still foul you super hard, or do you have superstar status? So he was great. But those guys were kind of the people I kind of came up with. And it was cool because when I said, yeah, I was in various sales jobs. I sold all sorts of stuff. It's not necessarily a pretty story, but I was in sales. And eventually I got into pharmaceutical sales with no college degree. The guy said, do you have a degree? And I said, I have a BS.
That's a really, okay, yeah.
And I did, So anyway, he hired me. And I did that for about 5 years. And quite honestly, my first Mulligan wife, my first wife, no golfers. Mulligan's a do-over in golf. So my first wife was an actress. Mm-hmm. And she was doing well at the time. But she was one of the first people that would say, you're really good at, because I would sit around and play guitar and sing. And she would say, you're really good at that. And I don't think anybody ever told me that. You need a certain amount as an artist. You need a little bit of validation. Somebody's got to go, you're good at this. If you're spinning your wheels and you don't get a song cut, or if you're not performing, then at some point you kind of go, is this a hobby or is this my vocation? So I decided to put a band together based on the fact that my wife at the time was like, you're really talented. So I did. I started playing, and then I always say Christmas Eve, 1999, I made her a nice Christmas dinner, and I said, what do you want for Christmas? And she said, I'm thinking I want a divorce.
Wait, that actually is how it happened?
Yeah, and I said, whoa, I wasn't planning on spending that much.
Oh my gosh.
These are the jokes, people.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so you didn't really want to get a divorce? Or was it already on like the fritz?
Yeah, it was.
Okay.
It was. So we got a divorce, and I moved home. That's a funny joke. And I started slinging songs. You know the drill. And so I went to see all these different people. I didn't know that many people, but I knew some. Anyway, I got shot down. Like, it's just amazing how many times you get shot down.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then I signed with a small company. And then I ended up signing with a company Toby Keith owned. Toby cut a song of mine called My List that Rand Bishop and I wrote. And that went on to be a #1 song for 5 weeks. So I went from, in the interim, I'll tell you, between moving home, I had a pub deal, they closed. So there was like a year where I was like, what in the actual heck am I going to do? And I was painting houses. Uh-huh. Like, I don't mean like,
You were really like painting houses.
Van Gogh.
Yeah.
I was painting houses. And, I kind of had a point where I was like, all right, whoever's up there, like, this is not what I signed up for. I want to make this happen. And then when I signed with Toby's company, and then he cut My List, and it went on to be a #1 song, I went from painting houses to buying houses.
Which is probably a better trade-off. Yeah. So if you are 37 and you're quitting like the job that really pays the bills and does everything, would you have made those decisions if you had already had kids? Or it's just like really good timing, the fact that you were able to kind of pursue that in the time that you got it?
100%.
Okay.
100%.
And obviously within those 3 years too of you are not both 37, and then how many times you signed a publishing deal that fell through, and then how did you meet Toby? How did all of that happen?
Yeah.
Because I really want to get into the Toby Keith of it all.
Yeah. So when I came home, I signed with a company called Hayes Street Music, which Don Schlitz owned. Don Schlitz wrote The Gambler and When You Say Nothing at All. So he was starting a little pub company. So I signed with him. Yeah, after a year and a half, they closed. And now I'm like 30. If I tell you how old I am, you're going to go, there's no chance. But I was like old enough that I was like, I've got to figure this out. And so they closed up. I'm painting houses. I'd become friends with a guy named Chris Dubois.
Oh, yes, I interviewed him. Yeah.
Yeah, he's great. He's
Lovely.
one of my old friends. Me, Chris, Kelly Lovelace, Dave Turnbull, Jim Catino, Cos Weaver. All these guys are now big shots in the music business. And we would hang out together. And then one night they were like, hey, man, do you want to go to a football game? And a Titans game. And I was like, sure, why not? And so went to the game. Afterwards, we go back to the parking lot of the old EMI building. And quite honestly, we're sitting there drinking beer and telling dirty jokes. And Jim Catino was there. And Catino was working at the time, I believe, at DreamWorks. And he was young, and we were all young except me. And so he said, "What are you doing now, man?" And I was like, "Well, I'm trying to write." Because it's a struggle, you got to get, how it is. You got to be in with the right people.
You do, and I think it's gotten a little bit harder these days. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I think it's exponentially harder. However, Catino's just very casually said, "Well, I know somebody who's signing, and if you're painting houses and you're dead broke, I mean not dead but close." I was like, "Who?" Sorry, and he said Rob Hendon. And Rob was running a small pub company that Toby Keith and TK Kimbrell started. So again, if you're desperate, pretty close to it, I just said, sure. So I contacted Rob, and Rob said, well, come over, and you got to, how that is. You do the dance, you play them 3 songs, and they go, Nyeh. And so I kept doing the dance with Rob for only like 2 or 3 times, I guess. And then Rob called me and said, hey, man, you need to get a lawyer. And I was like, gosh, did I do something illegal again? Because it wouldn't be the first time. And he said, no, you need to get a lawyer because Toby wants to sign you. Well, again, if I'm being transparent, like when you get offered a pub deal with Toby Keith, I didn't care I knew the contract was going to be a straight pub deal. I knew they were going to get it. And I just went in and said, get the pen out. Like,
yeah.
And I signed it. And as a result of that, there was 2 other writers. And you can view this however you want. I try to say it was some sort of serendipitous thing, but Toby came in and he was very, he's very to the point and very cut and dried. But he came in and said, I'm going to cut a song from the new catalog in the next week. I'm going to cut a record. Well, oddly enough, as fate would have it, my ink was the only ink that was dry because I just went, and the other 2 guys had theirs caught up in legal land with their lawyers. So realistically, when he said to Rob, like, well, what songs can I cut? Rob said, the only catalog you own at this particular juncture is Tim James's because the other guys haven't signed. Well, again, the way he rolls, he was just like, well, give me 3 or 4 songs, So he heard my list and he said, well, I love that song. I think I'm going to cut it. And yeah, they went in, cut the song. The first 2 singles from that album were I Want to Talk About Me, which was a great song. Nowadays, I don't think anybody would even take a shot at that because we've lost our sense of humor.
We sure have, haven't we?
It's like, come
such
on,
a shame.
I know. And anyway, I can tell you some off-color jokes, but I won't. So I Want to Talk About Me was the first single. And then the second single was I'm Just Talking About Tonight. The first one was basically I want to talk about myself. The second one was basically I want to hook up. But he just took on that character.
He very much so.
He was great at that. But then 9/11 happened, and Scott Borchetta was head of promotions at DreamWorks. And Borchetta went to Toby and said, hey, man, if you want to put a song out that'll resonate with people, put out this My List song. Now, he was somewhat resistant because in the middle of his show, which was, patriotic, hell-raising songs.
Like kick-ass kind of stuff.
He didn't want to, he was like, But then he cut it, and then Borchetta said, I love it, I want you to put it out. He did, went to #1 for 5 weeks. But, that song is like, that. It's bizarre to me to even look back and go, how did that happen? Because that song has now been on like 11 million albums. First album sold 3, greatest hits 2, 1, 2, 3, so forth and so on. It's kind of the gift that keeps on giving. But yeah, he was always, that's the only song of mine he cut. I wrote some songs with him that I thought he should have cut, but he's not somebody you want to tell what to do.
Right. Okay, so going back to My List though, do you remember writing that?
Yeah.
What stemmed the back of that backstory?
Yeah, absolutely. My dad and I were super close. There's some Baileys in this.
Well, it is a little chilly outside.
Yeah.
It's bad weather.
But my dad and I were super close. And when I lived in L.A., 12 years, I mean, are your parents still in Sacramento?
Yes.
It kind of sucks at times.
Oh, yeah.
And that's just the way it is.
Sure
so
does.
for me, it was like I was a 20-something-year-old kid didn't know anything about LA, had to learn all that on the fly. But what I realized when I got older was, man, I miss being around my parents. And it sounds simple, but you got to go do your thing. But I still believe in like coming home. So for me, when I came home to visit one time, only a couple years before I moved back, maybe even like a year. And my dad had a heart attack. And so they put him in the hospital and they do open heart surgery. And I just remember one of my other buddies, Greg Webb, who was an actor and so forth and so on. Greg always wrote down on a little tiny piece of paper and put in his wallet his list of stuff he had to get done. And because I'm more of a fly by the seat of my pants guy, I was like, I don't have the attention span for that. And eventually I started saying to myself, if I don't write this stuff down and remind myself, like Chippendale's audition at 4.
You just forget it.
Yeah, I just forget it. So I remember thinking to my dad about my dad. I was like writing. I was coming home here, and I was writing with a guy named Rand Bishop, who's a very talented guy. And I just remember that morning driving in and thinking, man, I just want to write a song about how my list is all kind of jacked up. Like my list is all this, stuff I got to get done. Who really gives a rip when your dad is laying in the hospital? So I was like, man, I want to write a song about my list, but I want it to be like my list of things has changed for the better. And Rand's very talented. He kind of started playing that little lick, and then we just kind of wrote it. We wrote it that day. Wrote it in the morning, went to get lunch, came back, finished it up. He made a home demo. I played it for Rob Hendon. Rob said, man, I love this. And then that goes back to the story about, he played it for Toby, and Toby said, well, I love it. I don't know if it fits me, but I do love it. So there you go.
Well, because Toby, so have you been to Tahoe?
Yeah.
Okay, so that was where me and his family, we would always go for our summer concert series over Harvey's, Harrah's, that stage. And it was always Toby we would go see. Like that was like I think that had to have been my first country concert. And we would just see him every single year. He was both my mom and my dad's absolute favorite. Do you ever think there will be another Toby Keith?
I don't. Again, I think if we were going back to that, how do you like me now? Or,
yes.
I'm just talking about tonight, or I want to talk about me. No, nobody's going to do that. I think he was so self-confident, which he was, that he was like, I'm going to do what I want, when I want. And if you don't have a sense of humor, then I can hear him say certain things that I can't repeat. But he was very much like, man, this is me. And I'm going to, again, he's great at taking on a character, I thought. The American Soldier, that was him, though. Like he was very patriotic. Now, we're not going to delve into it, but he wasn't, hardcore one way or the other.
Sure.
He was like, listen, man, I'm just a straight believer in the United States.
In America.
That's it.
Yeah, I get it.
Seems like we've gotten, that message is so convoluted too. He just was like, no, man, I just love my country.
Absolutely.
And that dude did, countless USO tours. His dad was in the Army. So, I think that an artist, I could right now think of, if you can think of somebody, I
can't. That's
me
why.
either.
And it's one of those things where he was such a force to be reckoned with that was like, I don't care what anybody thinks, kick ass kind of. Really a big personality. Was that who he was off the stage as he was on the stage? Did it feel the same, or was there another side of Toby that other people didn't see?
Yeah, I think you sit alone on a bus at 3 a.m. and it's it may not come out until 2:55 that he's got this other side to him, but he worked in the oil fields, and he had a roughneck side to him, and I think that was his MO. I've seen him threaten, like I thought, okay, he's going to kill that guy, but he stood up for what he believed in.
Yeah.
But he was also, he loved his family, very sensitive about his family, and just an overall like an absolute good guy.
And since that was like kind of your bigger first publishing deal, you walk into Nashville, you get the publishing deal. Is it like that anymore?
No.
So coming from somebody who has been able to see it when, and also getting to see it now, what's something that you would say to somebody now coming in trying to get a publishing deal? Because quite frankly, when I sit down with other songwriters and we talk about this, they mention how cliquey Nashville has really become, and how there are these groups of people that you have to somehow, I don't know, get at the table with, and it's almost impossible.
Right.
So what does a songwriter do coming to town, 37 years old, quit the day job, has nothing else, but this is what they want to do? What do they do? Because it's not the same.
Yeah, I don't know. Keep your day job. I think that probably the same thing that we did, but it is definitely different. Like you said, the click thing is out of hand.
It's out of hand.
You know, like I don't, at my age, you know, some buddies of mine on the regular for the last year and a half, until I just finally said, man, you got to leave me alone about that. Like, you want to go to the Red Door at 4 o'clock? And I'm like, hell no.
You know, but have you gotten down on the ground and looked in the hole and seen
No.
like I mean, there's still something you got to do, I think.
Put it this way, I don't even know what that means.
No, there's like a hole in the bottom of the ground and you can
No,
look
there's
in
not.
it. Yes, and you can see like this fake skeleton.
Is that true?
Yeah. Okay. So when I first moved here, I was told to do it, and I really thought it was a joke for someone to like stomp on my head into the ground. And I go, "There's no way I'm getting down on all fours and looking at the ground." I did it, and there is like a fake skeleton, but that's
Seriously?
Yeah.
Dang. No, I've never done. I put my hole in the ground or my head in the ground. I've never been in Losers.
You've never been there?
Mm-mm. Like, the name alone freaks me.
But have you been to Winners?
No.
Okay, well, then I guess.
Suck equally as bad. No, I don't. So I say this all the time. If you go back to, like Jeffrey Steele signed me to like one of my first.
Love him.
Yeah, he's great. Rivers Rutherford, who's one of my best friends, who I just talked to last night, and we did a gig last week. Casey Beathard. In the older days, like Kerry Kurt Phillips or Mark Allen Springer, James Dean Hicks, these guys that were great songwriters.
These are like the songwriters.
Yeah.
Though. I mean, like you're mentioning the names that unfortunately it just is. Where are they?
That's a good question. But those guys in those days, they didn't. I can't remember a time when they would say, "Yeah, let's go drinking." Like we played in a basketball league and a bunch of us met doing that. Outside of that, maybe once every couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Kendall Marvel, Phil O'Donnell, Stapleton, we occasionally, me and Stapleton and Kendall would tie one on. But that was rare.
Yeah.
Like, and it was not cliquish. It wasn't like we went and there was 30 other people where you go, where in the hell they'd come from? Mm-hmm. It was just like the three of us. Me, Kendall, and Stapleton. So those days were fun and great. Now it's a younger game, one, and two, you're absolutely correct. Like if you're not in with those guys, I'm going to answer your question, then I wouldn't know how. I think the standard, join NSAI, BMI, ASCAP, CSEC, whatever it may be. One of my first publishers, Steve Markland, said, come up with your guys. Well, fortunately, my guys were Stapleton, Kendall Marvel, Phil O'Donnell, Casey Beathard.
Not a bad group to come up with.
Gosh, no. And so that was kind of the way it happened in those days. Now, I don't even know. If you're 30-something years old, it's dang near impossible. I would think.
Okay, so I was going to ask you, like, obviously hypothetical, but I want you to place yourself in the music industry, which is today, not when you came here. If you were 37, now you don't have to be in LA, you could be anywhere else, and you had a full-time career job, would you make the same decision, knowing that it's the music industry that we live in today, not the one you came in?
Probably not.
Okay.
I just don't see a means to an end. For instance, if you get on I'm on the new, and I'm very grateful, I'm on the new Kenny Chesney album. If you don't get a single, and you might make a couple $1,000.
An album cut used to be a big deal.
Yeah.
And now it's like, if you're not the single that gets shipped to radio.
Yeah. I know some guys that were on Garth records that made a fortune just from album sales. And even if I go back to my list still sells.
Absolutely.
It's crazy. So I don't know if I would or not, to be honest with you. I kind of think that I would say the code is too hard to crack. And if I were 37, I mean, I'm 39 now, but
I mean, I was about to say you looked 29.
you lie like a dog. I don't think I would. I think I would. I don't know how to crack the code.
Right.
Like writing the great song. And then again, I write with these guys all the time. Tomorrow I'm with Brett James, who's had 27 number ones. Even he at times is like, I don't know. I mean, I guess now it seems like the direct route is to write with an artist.
Which, okay, coming from being an artist, I hate this idea. I think it really does box in a true songwriter from being able to do what you do, which is just write a really good song and let it find a home where it finds a home. And instead you're so focused on what this artist needs to say, what they sound like, what they do, that at that point, you're not really doing what you do. And there's something really damaging about that, in my opinion. I guess right now in this business, it's an unpopular one, but I don't really care because I think we have not as good music to show for it. And that, to me, has very much concerned me, and especially for the songwriter. So, like, I know you've written a book, which I want to get to, because I know that's another form of, like, I guess, income in the world of being able to do something else creative. But I've noticed a lot of other songwriters that I sit down with now wear so many other hats. They're either involved in management, they're involved in publishing, they're involved in producing. Is there something that have you wanted to try on another hat? Because they're doing this now to kind of almost make money.
Very fortunately, I don't have to yet. It's possible, but I got super lucky. Again, I played a show the other day and I was like, Paul McCartney told me to quit name dropping.
We like name dropping here.
Did you get the joke? Paul McCartney told me to quit name dropping.
It did go over my head for a second, but I'm back.
Sacramento. But Rivers is, and a lot of these guys and Kelly too, they do tons of corporate gigs. And I mean, they pay fantastic.
Sure.
Years ago, I think people would book bands and the Northwestern Mutual, whoever it may be, would be like, oh my gosh, we're paying $50,000 to get Earth, Wind and Fire to sing 3 songs or whatever it may be. Rivers sort of tapped into that market and they do songwriter shows. And then I book, like I'm driving to Southern Illinois today.
Wow.
With my friend Dan Couch, who wrote something about a truck for Kip Moore. And so we're going up there, but it pays. It's a 2.5 hour drive from here. It pays good. So to answer your question, I never, and this is one of the pieces of advice I got early on. Kerry Kurt Phillips, who had 10 number ones, who again was a guy that, in terms of today's world, so this idea of 2 songs a day or he was like, no. He was so old school that he would say, if you get a great idea, go to lunch and then come back and kind of kick it around and then come back another day. And he would take 3 or 4 writing sessions to write a song.
Sure.
Which I found to be so cool because he wanted to get it right. So now, guys in my shoes, well, I'll tell you what he told me, but he said, if and when you get a hit, don't buy a boat or a motorcycle or another car. And I didn't. I bought rental houses. So, now for me, it's like, and I'm twice divorced. So as Eddie Murphy said, they get in half. That was kind of, and I'm still like, I just didn't buy. I mean, maybe I should update my wardrobe. What do you think?
No, I think you look great. But okay. So, you do have another form of income.
Yeah. I've had those for 20 years.
Yeah. Which is looking good now.
Yeah. It looks really good.
really good now.
Keeps me from going back to that senior Chippendales gig.
That's too bad though, because like I said, you don't look a day over 29.
Yeah,
so
sure.
I mean, it would.
Yeah. No, I've got underwear that's 29.
But tell me about your book, because I think that's really interesting that was something that you felt called to do. And what was something that you felt like you had to put in your book that you couldn't do through songwriting? Because obviously songwriting is a form of storytelling.
Yeah.
And then you actually decided to literally put out a book. So tell me about that.
Well, it's not income producing, one. Yet.
But so, I mean, no, it was something that you just felt like you really wanted to put out.
Yeah. So I went, I played the Bluebird like 7 years ago, which I play on the regular. And I told the story. Like, so I grew up on a farm, and then I'd never been on a plane. I went to LA. I met a bunch of people that became super famous people. And then I, at 35, put a band together and went, I think I'm going to start playing in a band. And my friends were like, what? Like my friends that are comedians were like,
Clooney didn't want to join.
no, but I dropped that name a couple of times when I was trying to get a gig in Reseda. I was like, well, there might be a guy, and truthfully, he came to the first ever.
Really?
Yeah, it was funny. Like all my buddies were there, and I was like, and of course, I walked out on stage, and you're a performer. I'm 35 years old. I walked out on stage and was like, or before I walked out, I was in the little green room, and I was like, I've lost my voice. And my guitar player was like, what do you mean you lost your voice? And I was like, I can't. And he was like, dude, you're just nervous. Like, peel it back a little. So then I think I did a shot of tequila and walked out there. But all my buddies are out there. And I'm like, part of me expected them to go, what in the hell? But they were super supportive. But the book was me playing here. And this lady heard the whole story because of the Bluebird. You're telling the story.
Yep.
And she was like, oh my gosh, she loved the song Love Like Crazy. She was like, that's one of my all-time favorite songs. But when I played that, my list, and the other songs I've had, she just said, that's the craziest story I've ever heard. And turns out she was a book agent. And she said, you should write this. And I thought, man, I don't have the attention span to write a song. So I sat down one night by myself 8 years ago and just start. I'm of the mindset that work begets work. Mm-hmm. So whatever work it is you're doing, the more work you do, the more work you do. So I started writing, and then I would write a chapter, and then next night or 2 nights later, I would look at it again and go, it's not bad. And then I just kind of stayed with it. And then I think really, and this is off topic in terms of music, but I think the taboo for men is sort of mental illness. And not that I suffer from any. You're going, sure you don't. But when I moved back home to Tennessee, I got married a second time. Yeah, I'm over 2. I want to brag, but
Gosh.
I got married a second time, and I was married 20 years. And then boom, out of the blue, I'm not a cheater. I'm just not. That's just not my MO. And so she wanted a divorce. We had just built a new house. So we ended up getting a divorce. So the book covers, that's why it's called Going Crazy, between the music business. And again, we talked about this briefly, like you need a certain form of validation or you wouldn't be doing this.
No, yeah.
And for me, the validation is, like I heard Stallone in an interview yesterday, like he said, it's insatiable. You can't let it go once you get this.
It's very true.
And so for me, I just started writing, and then the more I wrote, and then I got to a place where I thought, I think I'm actually going to try to do something with this. Now, the mental illness aspect of that is it's not necessarily mental illness, but when you go through enough stuff, I could say something else, you go through enough crap that you could play handball with the curb. I mean, I'm down there low. Then I was like, I'm just going to include this. So it runs the gamut of, each chapter is preceded by a song. I mean, like a brief snippet of a song. And that song like influenced me, whether it's mine or whether it's the Beatles or whether it's David Bowie or Larry Gatlin. That song influenced me at that period of my life. So that's sort of the setup. But it's really a memoir.
That's very creative.
Thank you. It's a memoir. It's like me saying, like, man, I grew up on a farm. And it's meant to be inspirational. I always say the word that comes to mind is perseverance. Because even if I'm hearing you correctly, this is frustrating. I would think, on both of our ends. And the only thing I can tell you is if you don't continue to do it, you will not make it. I guarantee
absolutely
you
not.
that.
No.
So I'm never was a quitter. Like I stayed with everything to the point that it was ridiculous. Like, you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, I don't like losing at things.
That's
it's
me.
really frustrating.
Well, you'll want to read that and go, oh my gosh, that's my spirit animal. I hated losing, like at anything. And so I framed most things, even in the music business, as competition. And I don't know if that's always healthy, but yeah.
And I know that's a really kind of, I guess, a taboo thing to say, but I've said before that when you really look at, like, say, a radio chart, you look at an award show, there's only so many seats on that floor, there's so many spots on that radio chart. And I had Gretchen Wilson here at the beginning of this season, and she even said, like, I know it's a bad thing to say, but it's who are your top 3 favorite people and how are you going to knock them out of the way? And it's a horrible way to put it, but there are only so many spots. There's only going to be so many songs being recorded by artists, so they're only going to be accepting so many songs for an album. There's really so many things available. Right. And I don't believe that you have to literally actually, try and, deceive people to hurt them. But I think if you just do what you do and you continue to do it and you put your head down and you work hard, I think there is a time for everybody. I really do wholeheartedly believe that, as long as you're not mentally ill and you think you're really good at something and you happen to not be good at it at all. I think that's where you need to have some trusted people around you. But who did you want the audience of the book to be?
Anybody. I think, I think it would be helpful to people trying to get in the music business because it does talk about my journey.
Sure.
Like how I went from, again, painting houses. But I say this all the time to younger people, like, do your homework. Like I'll have people say, well, man, I got offered a single song deal. And then I go, do you know what the legalities of that? And they're like, no, I don't even know what a pub deal is. And I'm like, dude, do your homework. Like, cause there's other people here, yourself, anybody you've been here for years, you paid your dues, you're going to have to find the right avenue. But I got news for you. And you just alluded to this. I have some friends that are my age and, it's like they get in a room and I go, you're still on the end of the bench, man. Yeah. If you get a chance, and this was drilled into me early on, if you get a chance to get in a room with somebody that's a kick-ass songwriter, be prepared.
Yes.
And to this day, like I'm telling you, tomorrow I swear to God, I feel like I'm name dropping. I'm with Brett James and Chris DiStefano tomorrow. Now, it would be ridiculous for me to go in there unprepared. So Brett and I got 2 on Kenny Chesney, but both times, one's with my buddy Danny Myrick, but we took them in. I took one in, verse and chorus. And he was like, oh my God, I love that. So we finished it. But I'm a believer in, preparation. But I think going back to the overall theme of that is, it's perseverance, man. Yeah. It's like even personally, like I've been kicked in the cojones and I just go, the only way to not get up is not get up.
Get up.
And I just don't do that. I just get up and go, that's the subtitle, left foot, right foot, breathe. I just get up the next day and go, I don't know what this day's going to bring, but I'm going to go do the work.
Well, it's all you can do, or you might as well just sit back and wait for your time to go.
Yeah.
I mean, what else, right? You got to keep going. I enjoy the fact to know that you're the guy that shows up to the group project and contributes. So when you get the A, you can actually say, I did something. Because I think that's something that we're struggling with in the songwriting world, especially when it comes to artists in the room and whatnot. And I don't know if it's frustrating for you, but I mean, I'm not saying songwriters don't contribute. I mean, artists don't contribute. But I know there's a lot of artists that kind of hang around in the room and just add their name to it. And that's got to be frustrating, I would think. I'm an artist and I don't really consider myself a songwriter. I consider myself a co-writer now. I'm still a work in progress because I've learned that now in this ever so rapidly changing industry, I've got to be one or I'm kind of looked over. Like the idea of the incoming artist, if they're not also a songwriter on their resume and also a content creator and also all the other hoopla, then they're really looked over by everything. And it's crappy because you see all of the artists that I looked up to that came before me, and they were able to be pitched really good songs. And their job was just to be convincing at performing it.
Right.
And that really isn't the case anymore. And that is a very frustrating change in this world, because I did not come to town thinking that I was going to be a songwriter, because I knew what I was good at. I wasn't going to fake it. I was like, that's going to be called out in 5 seconds. So I'm just going to be unapologetically myself. And now I'm kind of pushed into a seat that I didn't think I was going to necessarily be in. But I also love the fact that when I show up, I'm going to be prepared. I'm going to at least have an idea. I'm going to come in the room and not be that person that sits on their phone and twiddles around and kind of waits for a good idea to pop up. And then I just go, yeah, that sounds good.
Right.
Because if I get the opportunity to be in the rooms with people like yourself, heaven forbid, no way. So I really like that, that hopefully more people just come prepared.
Yeah, I think that's sage advice, is like, be prepared.
Yeah.
Whatever you can be prepared at. If you're an idea person, get a great idea. If you're a melody, come in with something. But yeah, I do think it's, now, I also, I know some other performers that are kind of in your boat, and I say to them, in today's world, I think it's beneficial to do exactly what you're doing, which is develop your writing skills. Because if you're going up against, at this stage of the game, and these are just two examples that come to mind, Lainey Wilson and Miranda Lambert, well, they're kick-ass songwriters. So, part of that is kind of what you said too, know what you want to say. Who do you want to be? And I think that's, and I don't know the whole story, but if I remember correctly, Lainey Wilson slept in her van out by the, some,
at least that's what I've heard as well. So
yeah, so it's like, okay, that's somebody that came and said, I'm not leaving until I get this right. And I do think that there's just me. This has nothing to do with you or I, but I have some friends that are kind of like you said. They're older, and I go, yeah, man. When you get in the room, if you don't have some talent, that shows as well, because you're not going to be, like in my case, I still love playing basketball. Well, even when I was a kid, we had one old guy in our neighborhood, and I would go over there and shoot all the time. And I'll tell you a funny side story to that. I don't really care. In Murfreesboro, we only had one Jewish family. And so they were from Brooklyn, New York, but they moved to small town Murfreesboro. And he was the nicest guy, but he was also the most crass individual in the world. But he was really keen on telling the truth. So his 6'5" son, who was one of my buddies and still is, was our high school starting center. And I would go over there, and I played on the team, but I would stay out there till all hours of the night, like in his backyard, just shooting. And he would always say, "What are you doing?" And I would say, "Well, I'm gonna play in the NBA one day." And he was like, "Let me just be clear with you. That's never gonna happen." You know what I'm saying? He was like, "You're a 5'10" white guy. You're not playing in the NBA. You can't even play at MTSU." So I ended up playing, but the side funny, and you'll get this, is because this is how old I am. Domino's had just come to Murfreesboro, and he would go in there, and he talked like this from Brooklyn, so he had a scratchy voice, and he would go call Domino's, and he's Jewish, so he'd say, "It's halibut. Now listen, I want a vegetarian special, no pork, no, And so when he did, he'd hang up the phone, and I was like 15. I'd run around to the front door. I'd pick up the landline and call Domino's and go, "Hey, it's halibut. I changed my mind. Bring me a meat lovers special." And they would walk in, and they would deliver it. He'd open it, and he would just throw it and scream, and I'd be like, "That's a great practical joke."
That is a great practical joke.
Anyway, more information than you asked for.
More the better. I've been able to interview Doug Johnson, so I've gotten his side of the idea of Love Like Crazy, but I would like to hear it because it's just you two that are the writers on that song. So how did that come to be, and how did that change your life? I mean, that was an insane moment with that song, but what's crazy is that it did not hit number one, right?
You know what? I say it did. It hit number 2.
But it's just crazy the life it had.
Yeah.
And so where did the story of that song start?
Well, same as my list in terms of my dad. So my dad passed away like 14 years ago now. And he was 86, and he lived a good life. And so I was over there visiting with my dad on a Sunday, and my dad had got, like 86, got diagnosed with lung cancer. And they say, we can treat it or we can do chemo. And I was like, nah, we're not doing that. And I have 2 brothers. I did. My older brother passed away. But I remember saying to my dad, like, Dad, we've talked about life and love and death. I said, one of the things we never talked about is you and Mom been married for 58 years. I mean, what did that feel like? And my dad kind of shed a tear and said, well, it felt like 10 minutes. He said it felt like 10 minutes underwater.
That's not really
Even
what he meant.
That dude's over there laughing. No, he didn't say that, but... So my dad passed away, and I was supposed to...
It's not funny. Now I'm not laughing at the fact that your dad passed away. I'm still
sure
trying
you are. My dad had passed away, and so for 2 weeks, I just, I was like, I'm not writing. I don't want to write a song. Like, I could give a crap about a song. And then I had Doug on my calendar. Doug and I had written some songs, and I went in and told him, I was just like, man, my dad died, and I want to write a song about my dad. My dad had this super common sense advice. Super simple stuff, but he was very convicted by it. He was like, just be a good person, do your best, and go to work. I mean, he would say that all the time. Like, even in regards to writing songs, he would like, go to work, man. I mean, go do your job. So I was telling Doug that, and I think Doug was kind of raised by same parents, same sort of morality, same rules, and we started writing that song. And it really, we wrote it in an afternoon.
Really?
And then I remember, I don't know if he remembers, because Doug runs a label, and he's...
Yeah, he's one of the people that wears a lot of hats.
Oh my gosh, he is so busy. He's busier than a one-armed banjo player with the crabs. But he... I'm
gonna save that one for a rainy day. Oh, it's actually raining outside. Maybe I'll say it to somebody today.
But... we wrote the song, and then I remember going home and thinking to myself, man, that's just not quite, it wasn't quite what my dad would have said, you know? And so we got back together another time, and I just said, man, let's simplify this chorus. And we did. And then, I went in and was cutting the demo. Doug came in and helped track it, and he's a great producer and a great writer. He's a talented guy. And then when I was at Warner Chapel, and I took it in and played it for them, and they were like, oh my gosh, this is Song of the Year. And so they were like, literally, I think they were like, this afternoon we're meeting with Hendrix for Blake or what, I can't remember. And I said, great. And then I called Doug. I was like, hey man, they're loving this song. He was like, don't let them pitch it. And I was like, what? Because, if you get a song, which is rare, that somebody's going to go, oh my God, I got to hit the streets with that. He said, I'm going to cut it like next week on Lee Brice. And I was like, Lee who? And he said, Lee Brice. And I was like, dude, I mean, I need a hit. And he said, trust me, this guy can sing. And so he cut it on him. And then, he, went to radio. And it reached 2, I think, on one chart. And it reached 1 on like the Music Row chart or something. So whatever I play out, I always say it was number 1.
Number
song.
1. Well, I mean, it kind of it should have been. Yeah. So, what would you say your hardest loss in this business has been?
In the biz, probably the singles that I was like, that song is a smash. Stapleton put out a song that he and I and Kendall wrote. We wrote it 15 years ago, and Leanne Womack cut it. It's called Either Way. And when Chris recorded the From A Room Volume 1 record, they picked Either Way as the lead-off single. Well, it's basically a guitar vocal. Like, it's him playing and him singing. Now, it's It's moving.
Well, people love that though with him.
People love it, but at the time, and this is why the business has changed and is still kind of sucks on some levels, is because they put the single out either way. The song debuts at 17. I mean, people are calling. I was with Warner, I think, and they're calling me like, dude, it debuted. I mean, it's going to be number one in 10 weeks. It went 17 to like slipped a couple of spots. Next week down to 20 something. In
Wow.
8 weeks, it was gone. And I remember talking to a friend of mine who's a PD and was in Tampa. They released the song in spring, and I said to him, like, hey, man, are you guys going to play either way? And he was like, nah, very nonchalantly. And, if that's your income, you're kind of like, that hurts. And I said, why? And this is just reality. He said, because the demographic, being 18 to 26-year-old girls, don't want to hear a song about divorce or breaking up in the heat of summer, drinking Natty Light on a boat. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, that's reality.
It is.
So the disappointing, I had that one which hurt, but it's still, that song is, it's sort of stood the test of time. It still gets played some.
Yeah, it has a life.
It has a life. It
Yeah.
just got used in a Tyler Perry movie. But that hurt because I was like, this could have been another hit. And you're kind of only as good as your last meal cooked or your last song, because people within the business know, like, I got one on Stapleton's new record. I got one on Chesney's new record. I got one on George Strait's new record. That's great. Trust me. I'm thrilled. People only know you based on the hits.
I was about to say it's really changed. And also what I wanted to bring up to you, and obviously this is nothing against you because I prefer the music from people like George Strait, Chris Stapleton, Kenny Chesney. But there is going to be a shelf life for them, right? Like that is going to come to an end and probably sooner rather than later with the way you look at the way that metrics are playing out. What happens to your style of writing? Where do you fit in when artists like that no longer do what they do?
I don't, if I'm being honest, I don't know that I do. I think that, it's a little difficult for me to write just rap songs, or rapid fire or.
We're hoping that goes away though.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think, some songs are making a comeback, I think.
I think so.
I still think it's fewer and far between. So yeah, to answer your question, I still have a pub deal. I'm still getting some cuts. I still enjoy it.
Of course.
But I also realize that, it's the tail end of it for me. And that's.
Well, hold on a minute. I don't necessarily think, because I think the pendulum swing is swinging back right now with the music we used to feel more at home with. I really do, with artists like Cody Johnson and then like Lainey Wilson. So Ella Langley, Riley Green, I think all of that is starting to find its way back.
Right.
Is there an artist in town that you think that you could hear your songs with?
I think like Luke Combs is somebody that I think is just like a country dude.
Absolutely. He has a magical way of bringing nostalgia to modern day.
Yeah.
And there's something really special about that. Because I talk about this all the time on this show that we are not creating longevity stars anymore, careers.
Absolutely not.
It is the revolving door of a new artist where all of a sudden I'm whiplashed and I see a whole new set of people on a Spotify playlist that I've never heard of before. And then 5 years down the line, it's a whole new set of names. And it's very rare to see a reoccurring name. And Luke Combs is somebody who is able to pass that and be a reoccurring name. And I think people should take some good notes at what he's doing.
Yeah. I agree with you 1,000%. I still think the airwaves are monopolized by Morgan Wallen. And,
Sure.
and I think
There's a
he's
place for him.
talented. Yeah, absolutely. I think he's cool. But to your point, like guys like me, so back to your question, you can still write a great song and you might have a shot. But even my own mom will say, well, age doesn't have anything to do with it. That's not true. Because if I walk in a room, like I wrote with some young guys like in their 20s, I want to say like 6 months ago, I walked in and they're like hat sideways and gold chains. And I'm like, I thought Tupac was dead. But, it's just, I go in and they're like, oh, man, I used to love your songs. And then it's,
Yeah.
So you kind of feel like, I played a show with Tom Douglas like 2 weeks ago. I mean, Tom is almost 70.
Right.
And he's had, he wrote,
House
That Built Me, Grown Men Don't Cry. And he's playing those songs on stage, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so good. And that's so well crafted. But he's the same. Like he said, I haven't had a cut since the Dead Sea was sick.
Well, I just had Mark Irwin on the show, and we were talking about how things are in sound bites now versus songwriting really used to be storytelling. Okay. I love to be taken on a journey through a song where I don't really know where it's going to end until the end. And that's where it's the aha moment. Like, wow, that was a story. That was a cinematic moment in a little over 3 minutes. I don't think we have those right now. We have very much like, can I pull 10 seconds at any time from any part of that song and put it on TikTok and people replay it over and over again? So you're missing that moment of being able to tell a story, and versus like it just has to be catchy every second of the way, which I think is detrimental to storytelling.
Me too. But I think that, as you said earlier, like it's almost disposable. The song becomes disposable. The artist, you could be on the charts for 3 years and disappear, never be heard from again.
And that's happening far more than it ever used to.
Oh my gosh, like it happens all the time.
Yeah.
And I'm like you, I'll look at it every now and then, I'll pull up the media base chart and I'll go, who? Dasha? Is that DoorDasha? I have no idea who that is.
So I know I asked you what your biggest loss was in this business. What would you say is your largest win that you would love to relive if you could?
Probably Love Like Crazy.
Okay.
Because again, 56 weeks to linger around, and then, you see people and it's still that thing Stallone said, it's kind of insatiable, because you're an artist. Like you get this and then you go, oh, it's got its teeth in me. It's the same as getting a hit song. In my case, growing up in Murfreesboro, and I don't know if we have this in common or not, but if you go home to Sacramento and people go, well, what are you doing now? And you go, well, I'm still singing.
Yeah.
And they go, well, can I see you anywhere? And you go, well, I'm
not really.
Yeah. So you see what I'm saying? Like, so for me, when I would, I'm in Murfreesboro and people go, what are you doing now? And you go, well, I'm writing songs. And they go, well, hell, anybody can write songs.
Yeah, with AI, it's just getting kind of scary.
And that's scary too. But my point is, like, you're only as good as, like I said, your last meal cooked or your last hit. And
do you not think, though, now with the generation of songwriters that you've come from, don't you think that I also think you could be as good as your legacy?
Yeah. I don't have, I have that much, although I heard Mike Tyson interviewed the other night. It was before the fight, but they were like, legacy. And he was like, legacy?
Oh, that's right.
Like, somebody that thinks something good about, I don't care about that. He said, I want my kids to think I'm a good dad, and I want people to think I'm a good guy. And that's kind of me. It's like, I did more than I ever thought I would even do. And to something, and I say this to be encouraging to you. You asked me if I ever thought about anything else. 2 years ago, like the book was done. I was still had a pub deal, but I'd had one cut.
Wow.
In like a 3-year period. And I'd had some hits, so I still get to go out and play, and that's great. But I thought about it. I was like, okay, what else could I do? Like I thought, well, I'll just get a real estate license or something. I'll be the singing real estate guy or some crap like that. That's not going to fly.
I'm pretty sure that probably exists in this town.
There's a guy in Murfreesboro. He did it, and I was like, dang, dude, you beat me to the punch. But I definitely kind of went, okay, how can I recreate myself? And about the time that I said, it was this year, it was like a year and a half ago, and I was like, screw it. And then earlier this year, I'd had one song that I was like, I wrote with Brett. I was like, man, this I'd stake my career in this song. And my publisher, Tim Medlin, who owns Porchlight, same thing. He was like, I'd bet $1 million that this song is a Kenny Chesney song. So he hired a young girl named Jenny Hall. She came in, and I said to her, I think this is where you get to the point of desperation, where you got to drive it home to these people, younger people especially. Like, I know this song is right. So she played it for Kenny. Kenny said, I'm coming in to cut it Wednesday. So, but that was like in March. So in a span of like 3 months, Stapleton earlier this year went in and cut a new record. I did not have any idea that I was going to have a song on it. Kendall Marvel and I wrote the song together. Kendall texted me when I was in Florida and said, hey, man, have you seen the new Stapleton album cover? And I was like, why would I? I don't give a rip. And he said, pull it up. And I pulled it up on the internet, as the old people say, the internet. And there was like our song at number 7. I was like, get out. So then 2 months later, get a Chesney cut. A month later, Chesney's cutting an acoustic album. I get a cut on that. And then Straight went in to cut a new record. Last minute, somebody played him an old song I wrote with Stapleton and a guy named Jamison Clark. And Straight went, oh my gosh, I'm cutting that today. So in a matter of this year, I've had those 4 cuts. And whether I get I mean, I hope I do, obviously. But if I don't, going back to part of our original conversation, is you want to feel relevant.
Absolutely.
And it's difficult now in Murfreesboro. Yeah, I'm the, small town boy made good. But at one point, there was a time people were like, well, I mean, if you don't have anything to show for it, is it a hobby or is it a job?
Absolutely.
So even in the last year and a half ago, I was like, yeah, man, I can see my picture on a for sale. But I just went with, no, I'm just going to keep doing the work. And
you still are.
Here I am.
What do you think is still in store for country music? What do you think's next?
I think that really the face of it has changed. Like my buddy Eric Hurt signed Shabuzi 4 years ago. And people were like, what? And he was like, trust me on this one. So I think that, that's opened up a whole new avenue. I do think like you and I were talking about, Luke Combs is, my friend Dave Turnbull wrote that song, Where the Wild Things Are. And that's just a well-written,
very
good song. I think the Morgan and those guys, man, they're going to have, they've got their grips on it. And I don't blame him. He does what he does.
Right.
It's like in the old days, they would say, the only song I want to hear him singing is one of mine.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, like if I got a call, like if I said, man, I can't stand country crap rap. And then I got a call like, hey man, Morgan Wallen cut your, I'd be like, I love Morgan Wallen.
I mean, the honesty of that, but it's true. I mean, because again, this is the music industry. This is the job.
That's it. It's my job.
It's the job. What do you think is in store for the songwriting community?
Well, unfortunately, you alluded to that earlier too. Like AI is, from me, because I don't get all that. But so I have this friend of mine that just showed me, she was like, okay, I can type in like country 80 beats a minute.
It's crazy.
And blah, 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 blah. And then she typed in some lyrics, and in 2 minutes, some dude is singing. And I was like, oh, no. This will be the downfall. So I don't know if it will. I'm not that well versed in all that. I do think it's a little frightening. The one thing somebody said to me just a couple of days ago, they said, the truth is that there's never love like crazy. There's no real emotion in it. There's no like connection.
Sure.
So I think that we're in a difficult place, but it also could be a wonderful place at the end of the day. I don't know enough about AI and all that. I still, just like tomorrow, like I said, I'm going to try to show up and do the best I can do, write the best song I can write, and throw it out there and see what happens.
Is there something that you haven't written yet, or something that you haven't accomplished yet that you want to accomplish?
Oddly enough, and again, this is something we talked about too, I'm still competitive, which kind of can be a detriment, but I still, even this year earlier when I was like, okay, I got one on these 3 guys. Those are 3 of the mainstays in our business. I thought, well, who's to say I couldn't get the first Chesney single, and then Stapleton's, and then a straight single, and then I could go from, oh, Tim had some hits to that's BMI Songwriter of the Year stuff. Mm-hmm. So in my head, I was still like, I can still do that. So yeah, I still have goals. Overall, I'm happy. Like, again, if you would have told, and you probably heard this said, if you would have told even a 35-year-old me, which is probably, you're younger than that now.
34.
Wow.
Yeah, you're pretty good at that.
I'm blushing. I think if you would have told me at 35, like even I'd be doing this and talking about these, and I would have gone, dude, you have lost your marbles. Mm-hmm. So I've done more than I've thought I would do. Is there still more to do? I'd like to hope and think so.
And lastly, because this is really interesting, and I've never asked this to somebody before, but because we've talked about it so much, who do you think the target audience is for country music right now?
I think the target audience is probably still the same, is like 18 to 27-year-old people.
Do you think it always used to be that, though?
No, it changed.
Yeah.
But what I feel like now, unfortunately, is that...
Like, I'm not the target anymore.
No, me either. But that leaves a whole sect of the population out. Yeah. Like, my friends, my age at 39, just... Mm-hmm, I mean,
we're like the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No. They're like, man, a lot of them are manual laborers. Like, they work, they're painters and they're like, yeah, I don't listen to the radio anymore.
Yeah, I don't even, yeah. Mm-mm.
Because there's nothing on there for me. Like, I don't want to hear that garbage. I want to hear, like, good country songs. So, yeah, I try to, I think if you get jaded and you get to, I call it the business of the business, because it does suck at times, let's face it, then you won't create.
That's true, yeah.
So I just try to focus on making stuff up.
That's what we do. Thank you, Tim, so much for being on What's Mine Is Yours. It was an absolute pleasure. Have fun at your show tonight.
Well, I'm actually driving up to do the show with Dan Couch, and then we're driving back to go. Tonight's the BMI Awards.
Oh, yeah.
So I got to try to get back, and even the company I write for, you're welcome to come by. They're having a party. You know where Carnival Music is?
Yes, I do.
Right below that is our office, but it's going to be a big party. They said Kenny Chesney's coming, and I was like, if I don't get a single out of him, I don't care.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much. I've had such a good time with you.
I'm glad you
Thank
did.
you very much.
Thank you for having me.